Cal had no reason to take Cinder Lane that evening. It was narrower than the main road, darker too, and the stones were uneven enough to turn an ankle if you were not paying attention. But his feet were tired and the main road was loud with evening traffic, and Cinder Lane cut 4 minutes off the walk home. 4 minutes meant his dinner was still warm. That was reason enough. He turned into the lane with his coat pulled close and his eyes on the ground ahead of him. The sun had dropped behind the rooftops and the light was that thick amber color it gets just before it gives up entirely. The market sounds faded behind him. The lane was quiet. Then it was not. He heard the sound before he saw anything. A high, tight noise, almost like a whistle, coming from somewhere near the far end of the lane. He had lived in Ashenvale long enough to know the sounds of the city the way you know the sounds of your own house. That sound did not belong. He looked up. 3 boys stood in a loose half-circle near the back wall of the lane. They were young, maybe 16 or 17, dressed in the kind of rough clothes that meant they worked the lower docks or the tannery. 2 of them had rocks in their hands. The third was laughing at something on the ground in front of them. Cal moved closer and saw what it was. 2 young drakes were pressed hard against the stone wall. They were small, nowhere near grown, with soft copper scales and wings folded so tight against their bodies they looked almost flat. One of them had a thin cut above its left eye. The other was making that whistling sound, low and continuous, the way a creature sounds when it is past afraid and into something worse. Cal stopped walking. He looked at the boys. He looked at the drakes. He looked at the rocks. Then he walked forward and stood between them. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply moved until he was standing directly in the space between the 3 boys and the 2 drakes, and then he stopped and looked at the boys and waited. The tallest one blinked. He had a wide face and a rock in his right hand and the expression of someone who had never had an adult step into the middle of something like this before. "What are you doing?" the boy said. "Standing here," Cal said. "These are just drakes. I know what they are." The boy looked at his friends. His friends looked back at him. Nobody seemed sure what the next move was supposed to be. Cal had not raised his voice. He had not reached for anything. He was just a plain man in a work coat standing in a lane looking at them with the kind of calm that is harder to argue with than anger. They were in the way, the boy said, like that explained the rocks. Cal did not answer that. There was no answer worth giving. He just kept standing there, steady and quiet, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes on the 3 of them without blinking too much or too little. The tallest boy dropped his rock. It hit the stones with a flat crack and rolled to one side. The boy to his left did the same a moment later. The third one, the one who had been laughing, stopped laughing. They left. Not quickly, not with any dignity, but they left, moving back toward the mouth of the lane without another word. Cal listened to their footsteps until they faded into the evening market noise. Then he turned around. The 2 drakes had not moved. They were still against the wall, still folded tight, still watching him with wide amber eyes that caught the last of the light and held it. The one with the cut was breathing in short, careful pulls. The other had stopped the whistling sound, but its whole body was tense the way a spring is tense. Cal crouched down slowly. He made himself smaller, the way you do around something that has just been frightened badly and needs time to remember that not everything in the world is a threat. He reached into his coat pocket and found the heel of bread he had saved from his midday meal. It was not much. It was a little hard at the edges and it had been in his pocket all day and it was the last food he had until he got home. He broke it into 2 pieces and set them both on the ground in front of him and then moved back to give the drakes room. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the smaller one moved. It came forward in a low creep, one careful step at a time, its eyes on Cal the whole way. It sniffed the bread. It looked at Cal again. Then it picked up the bread and ate it in 3 quick bites. The second drake came forward after that, slower, still watching him, and took the other piece. Cal stayed crouched and kept still while they ate. When they were done they both looked at him again, those amber eyes steady and unreadable, and Cal nodded once, the small nod you give someone at the end of a conversation when everything that needed saying has been said. The drakes slipped past him and disappeared into the shadows at the far end of the lane without a sound, quiet as smoke. Cal stood up. He brushed the crumbs from his hands and straightened his coat and walked the rest of the way home through the empty lane. He ate a cold dinner and went to bed. He did not think about it again that night. It had not seemed like the kind of thing that needed thinking about. He was wrong about that. But he would not find out for a while yet. The second time Cal saw the drakes, he had not gone looking for them. It was 3 days after the alley. He was cutting through Cinder Lane again, same reason as before, same tired feet, same 4 minutes he wanted back. He came around the bend near the old grain wall and there they were, the 2 of them, sitting in a patch of weak morning sun near the base of a broken down spout. They saw him the same moment he saw them. They did not run. They did not fold up tight the way they had against the wall. They just watched him, those amber eyes steady and careful, the way an animal watches something it has decided is probably not a threat but has not fully made up its mind about yet. Cal slowed his walk. He did not stop completely, just slowed, and he kept his eyes forward and his movements easy, and he went past them without making a thing of it. He felt their eyes on his back until he turned the corner. That was all. Nothing happened. He went to work and loaded crates and came home. But he checked the lane on the way back. He told himself he was not checking, that he was just walking, that Cinder Lane was a perfectly reasonable route and had nothing to do with two small drakes who may or may not be there. They were not there. He went home. He checked again the next morning. They were there, same spot near the downspout, sitting in the sun. He slowed again. This time he reached into his pocket and found a strip of dried meat he had packed for his midday meal, and he set it on a flat stone near the wall without breaking stride and kept walking. He did not look back. He did not need to. By the end of the second week it had become a routine without him deciding it was a routine. He started packing a little extra in his coat pocket each morning. Not much. A piece of bread, a strip of dried meat, sometimes a bit of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. Small things. Things that did not cost much and did not take long to eat. He left them on the flat stone near the downspout and kept moving and did not make a production of it. The drake started waiting for him. Not eagerly, not in the obvious way a dog waits at a door. It was subtler than that. They were simply always there when he came through, sitting in whatever light the morning offered, watching the mouth of the lane. When he came around the corner they would shift slightly, not toward him exactly, just a small adjustment, the kind of movement that meant they had noticed and were not alarmed. He started slowing down a little more each time. First just enough to set the food down. Then enough to crouch for a moment while he set it down. Then enough to crouch and wait a moment after, not doing anything, just being there, close but not crowding. The smaller one, the bolder of the two, came to the stone while he was still crouching on the fourth week. It did not look at him while it ate. It kept its eyes on the food and its body angled slightly away, which Cal understood was the point. It was eating near him, not with him, and that was a very specific difference that mattered a great deal. He stayed still and let it matter. The second one came to the stone 2 days after that. Cal gave them names inside his head around that time. Not names he said out loud, just names he used when he was thinking about them, which was more often than he would have admitted to anyone. The bold one he called Flint because of the way it moved, quick and decisive like something striking. The quieter one he called Ember because of the way it sat in the sun with its copper scales catching the light, warm and steady and patient. He did not tell anyone about the names. He did not tell anyone about any of it, mostly, but word got around the loading yard the way word always gets around a loading yard, which is quickly and with embellishment. Someone had seen him crouching in Cinder Lane. Someone else had heard he was feeding strays. By the third week his co-workers had opinions about it. Ned, who loaded barrels and had opinions about everything, told him it was a waste of food. A man named Finn said it was strange to get attached to drakes, that they were not pets and did not think of humans the way humans thought of them. A younger loader whose name Cal kept forgetting said it was actually going to cause trouble, that the drake families did not like humans involving themselves with their young. Cal listened to all of it. He nodded in the places where nodding seemed appropriate. Then he packed his coat pocket the next morning and checked the lane on his way to work. Flint and Ember were there. Flint took the food from the stone while Cal was still setting it down, bold enough now to close that last bit of distance, close enough that Cal could see the small details of its scales up near the jaw, the way they overlapped like tiny shields, each one perfect. Ember waited its usual moment and then followed. Cal crouched there in the early light while they ate and felt something he could not quite name. It was not pride exactly. It was not happiness in any loud way. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of having shown up the same way day after day, and having that mean something to someone small who had been frightened once and needed a reason to try again. He stood up when they were done. He straightened his coat. He went to work. Cal came home on a Thursday evening to find a folded note slipped under his door. He picked it up and read it in the dim light of the hallway. It was from his landlord, a broad man named Gruff who had been arguing with Cal for 3 months over a crack in the back wall that let in cold air and, on bad nights, rain. The argument had never gone anywhere useful. Gruff said the crack was there when Cal moved in. Cal said that was not true. Gruff said prove it. Cal could not prove it. The crack stayed. The cold stayed. The argument stayed. The note said the crack would be repaired by the end of the week at no cost to Cal and that the 2 months of reduced heating he had suffered would be taken off his next rent. No explanation. No apology exactly, but the practical version of one, which Cal had always found more useful anyway. He read the note twice. Then he folded it and set it on his table and stood there for a moment trying to think of what had changed. He had not pushed harder on the argument recently. He had not spoken to anyone about it. He had not done anything different at all. He could not explain it. He made dinner and went to bed and filed it in the part of his mind where unexplained things go when you are too tired to think about them. The second thing happened 4 days later. There was a merchant in the East Market named Doyle who sold dried goods, beans, lentils, the kind of heavy staples that kept a loader going through a long shift. Cal had bought a bag of lentils from Doyle 6 weeks ago and paid full price for what was marked as a 2-pound bag. He got home and weighed it out of habit the way his mother had taught him, and found it was closer to 1.5 pounds. He went back the next day. Doyle told him the scale was accurate and the weight was correct and suggested that perhaps Cal did not know how to use a scale. Cal knew how to use a scale. But Doyle was confident and loud and Cal was neither of those things in an argument, and he had walked away without his coin and with the particular frustration of knowing you are right and being unable to make it matter. He was passing Doyle's stall on his lunch break when Doyle stepped out from behind the counter and held out his hand. In it were 3 coins, a little more than the difference, without a word of explanation beyond a short nod that Cal supposed was meant to cover everything. Cal took the coins. He looked at Doyle. Doyle looked back at him with the expression of a man who has been told to do something and has decided doing it quickly is better than thinking about it too much. "Thank you," Cal said because it was the right thing to say. Doyle nodded again and went back behind his counter. Cal stood on the market street with 3 coins in his hand and the strong feeling that something was happening around him that he did not have the right information to understand. He thought about the note from Gruff. He thought about Doyle and the coins. He turned the feeling over in his mind the way you turn a stone over looking for what is underneath, and found nothing that made sense and eventually put the coins in his pocket and went back to work. The third thing was the guard. His name was Brent, and he had been stationed at the loading yard gate for as long as Cal could remember. Brent did not like loaders. He did not like the early morning, the smell of the yard, or the paperwork that came with logging each worker through the gate, and he expressed all of these feelings by being slow and sharp-tongued with everyone who came through, but especially with Cal, for reasons Cal had never fully understood and had eventually stopped trying to. Every morning Brent made him wait an extra minute at the gate while he checked the log twice, which did not need checking twice. He made comments about Cal's coat. He once made Cal open his lunch pack for inspection, which was not a rule, and found nothing and said nothing about finding nothing. It was small and consistent and exhausting in the way that small consistent things are exhausting, like a stone in your boot that is never quite big enough to stop and deal with but never small enough to forget. On a Monday morning Cal arrived at the gate and found a different guard standing there. A younger man who checked the log once found Cal's name and waved him through without a word. Cal stopped just inside the gate. "Where is Brent?" he asked. "Reassigned," the young guard said, already looking at the next worker in line. "Far gate, out by the river road." Cal walked into the yard. He set his things down at his station and stood there for a moment before the first crate arrived. 3 things. 3 separate, unconnected things, each one small on its own, each one fixing something that had been quietly wrong in his life for months. No explanation attached to any of them. He was not a man who believed in luck, particularly. He had lived long enough to know that good things did not usually arrange themselves in neat rows without a reason. He thought about Cinder Lane. He thought about Flint and Ember eating bread off a flat stone in the early morning light. He thought about the way they watched him when he came around the corner, that steady amber gaze that was always there, always calm, always paying attention. He wondered if paying attention worked in more than one direction. He did not have an answer. He picked up the first crate of the morning and got to work. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, placed on top of his boots outside his door sometime before dawn. It was not like the note from Gruff. That had been a folded scrap with uneven handwriting and a small grease stain in one corner. This was a proper letter, sealed with dark wax pressed into the shape of a wing, written on paper that felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Cal picked it up and turned it over in his hands for a moment before opening it. The writing inside was neat and simple. It said that his presence was requested at the hall of the old wing in the deeper district at the 3rd hour of the afternoon. It said that someone wished to speak with him. It said that transportation would be waiting at the end of his street if he chose to come, and that he was not required to come, but that it was hoped he would. That last part was what made him go. Not required. It was a small thing to put in a letter, but it was a considered thing, and Cal had learned over the years that considered things came from careful people, and careful people were usually worth listening to. He told the yard foreman he had an appointment. The foreman looked at the letter, looked at the seal, and told Cal to take the afternoon without docking his pay, which had never happened before in Cal's memory, and told him more about the weight of that seal than anything else could have. The transportation at the end of his street was a covered cart driven by a drake he did not recognize, older and larger than flint and ember, with deep bronze scales and the quiet manner of someone doing a job they had done many times. Cal climbed in without asking questions. The cart moved through streets he knew and then through streets he did not, going deeper into the older part of the city where the buildings were made of a darker stone and the roads were wider and the air smelled different, older somehow, like the city was breathing out something it had been holding for a very long time. The hall of the old wing did not look like what Cal expected. He had imagined something grand from the outside, towers and gates and the kind of architecture that wanted you to feel small. What he found instead was a long, low building of dark stone set back from the road behind a courtyard of bare flat ground. It was large but it was quiet. It did not show off. A drake attendant met him at the entrance and walked him inside without speaking. The interior was different from the outside. The ceilings were very high, high enough that the upper parts of the hall disappeared into shadow. The floor was smooth stone, worn down by a very long time of use. There were no decorations that Cal could see, no banners or statues or any of the things humans put in important rooms to remind visitors that the room is important. There was just space and stone, and at the far end of the hall, lit by light that came from somewhere Cal could not identify, something enormous. He had seen dragons before. Everyone in Ashenvale had. You saw them overhead sometimes or at the edge of the upper districts, and you registered their size the way you register the size of a mountain, as a fact that your mind accepts without fully processing. But he had never been in a room with one. He had never stood on the same floor and looked across a flat space at something that large and had it look back. She was ancient. He could tell that without knowing how he could tell. Her scales were the color of deep water, a blue so dark it was almost black, and they had the quality of very old things, settled and certain, each one exactly where it had always been. Her head was large enough that Cal's entire living space could have fit inside it comfortably. She was lying down with her forelegs folded beneath her, which he understood was a deliberate choice, a way of being less than she was so the conversation could happen at all. Her eyes were gold. Not amber like flint and ember. Gold, the way old coins are gold, deep and warm and full of something that had been accumulating for a very long time. She spoke. Her voice was low and even, and it moved through the hall the way water moves through a wide channel, without hurry, filling every part of the space. "You are Cal," she said. "The loader from the market district." "Yes," Cal said. His voice sounded very small in that hall, but it came out steady, which was all he asked of it. "I am Vora," she said. "This city is mine. Not in the way a merchant owns a stall. In the way a river owns its valley. I have been here longer than the oldest wall, and I will be here after the newest one falls. The council manages the daily business. I manage everything else." Cal stood still and listened. "Flint and Ember," she said, and the names, his private names for them, came out of her mouth like she had always known them, which stopped his breath for just a moment. "They are my youngest. I sent them to the market district 6 weeks ago. Young drakes learn by moving through the world, by finding out what it holds. I sent them with light watching, enough to keep them safe but not so much that they could not encounter the world as it actually is." She paused. The hall was completely silent. "They encountered you," she said. Cal did not answer because she was not finished. "I know about the alley," she said. "I know about the bread. I know about every morning in Cinder Lane, every piece of food set on that flat stone, every moment you stayed still and let them come to you in their own time. I know about the rent and the coins and the guard at the gate. Those were not my doing. Those were done by others who heard what you had done and responded in the way our kind responds to demonstrated worth." She looked at him steadily with those gold eyes. "You never asked for anything," she said. "Not once." Cal stood very still. There was nothing to say to that because it was simply true, and adding words to a true thing often made it less true. So he said nothing and waited, and the hall stayed quiet around them both. Vora let the silence sit for a long moment after she spoke. She did not seem uncomfortable in it. Cal got the impression she had lived long enough that silence did not bother her the way it bothered most people, that she had learned somewhere in her very long life that quiet was not empty, that it had texture and weight and that what a person did inside it told you more about them than most of what they said out loud. Then she asked her question. "Why did you help them?" Just that. 4 words, plain and direct. No extra weight put on them, no tone that suggested she already had an answer she was testing him against. She asked it the way you ask something when you genuinely do not know and genuinely want to. Cal thought about it. Not for long because the answer was not complicated, but long enough to make sure he was giving her the real one and not a version of it that sounded better. "They were scared," he said. "And they were small. And the people hurting them were bigger than them and had no good reason for it. He paused. That seemed like enough. Vora did not respond immediately. Her gold eyes stayed on him and he had the feeling of being read, not in an uncomfortable way but thoroughly, the way you read something you want to understand completely before you put it down. You did not think about what they were, she said. Drake or human or anything else. No, Cal said. You did not think about what helping them might cost you. Not really, Cal said. It was 3 boys with rocks. It was not that much of a cost. And the mornings after, she said. The food. The time. Those cost something. Cal considered that. A little, he admitted. Not enough to matter. To you, Vora said. To me, Cal agreed. She was quiet again for a moment. When she spoke her voice was the same as it had been, low and even, but there was something in it that had shifted very slightly, something that Cal could not name but could feel, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. I have ruled this city for a long time, she said. I have dealt with kings and councils and merchants and soldiers and every kind of person that power attracts. I have been offered loyalty by people who wanted something from me. I have been shown respect by people who were afraid of me. I have received kindness from people who knew who I was and calculated what kindness might return to them. She paused. What I have almost never encountered is a person who helped something small and frightened simply because it was small and frightened, and then walked away without waiting to see if it had been worth it. Kel did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. I want to offer you something, Vora said. Not as payment. I want you to understand that clearly before I say it. This is not a transaction. What you did cannot be paid for because it was not done for payment, and attaching a price to it now would make it smaller than it was. She shifted slightly, a slow and careful movement that still managed to make the floor feel different. This is an invitation. Cal waited. I have young drakes in my household at all times, she said. My own and those of families under my care. They move through the city as part of their learning the same way Flint and Ember did. The world they move through is not always careful with small things. She looked at him steadily. I would like you to be part of the household. Not as a servant. As a watcher. Someone who moves through the city in the normal way, does the normal things, and keeps an eye out for small creatures in alleys who have run into something larger and meaner than themselves. Cal stood very still. Among our kind, Vora continued, the protection of the young is not a small thing. It is not a duty given to people of low standing. The ones who guard hatchlings and young drakes are considered to hold a trust that very few outside our kind have ever been given. She paused. I am offering that trust to you. Cal looked at her. He thought about Cinder Lane and the flat stone and the way Flint had come forward that first time, body angled away, pretending not to care, eating the bread in 3 quick bites. He thought about Ember sitting in the morning sun with copper scales catching the light. He thought about his coat pocket and the bread heel and the 4 minutes he had saved on a tired Thursday evening that had turned into something he could not have predicted in any version of his life. All right, he said. It was not a grand acceptance. He did not have a grand version of it in him. It came out quiet and certain, the same way he had stood in that alley, no extra weight on it, just the plain fact of his answer. Vora made a sound low in her chest. It took Cal a moment to understand that it was the dragon equivalent of something warm. Not quite a laugh. Something older than a laugh. Then he heard movement to his left. He turned and saw a ledge along the lower part of the hall wall that he had not noticed before, set back in the shadow. On it side by side sat Flint and Ember. He did not know how long they had been there. Long enough, he thought. They were watching him with those amber eyes, steady and calm, the way they always watched him in the lane. But there was something different in their faces now. Something around the eyes and the edges of the jaw, a softness, an openness that he had not seen before. Cal had been told that drakes did not smile. Most people in Ashenvale would have said the same thing with confidence. Most people had not spent 6 weeks earning the trust of 2 small copper drakes in a back lane, 1 piece of bread at a time. They were smiling. He was certain of it. He looked at them for a long moment, these 2 small creatures he had named in the privacy of his own head, who had started as frightened things against a wall and become something he checked on every morning without thinking of it as checking. He nodded at them. The same small nod he always gave them at the end of a visit in the lane. Flint lifted its chin in return. Ember did the same a moment later, slower, in its own time, the way it always did everything. Cal turned back to Vora. She was watching him with those deep gold eyes and the expression of someone who has just seen something confirm what they already believed. When do I start? Cal asked. The warmth in her chest deepened. You already have, she said.